Hello, I'm Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of Winona. Today we're at Veterans Park at Lake Winona. Less than 10 years ago, this park area was just a low, grassy area that became a mud pit after a heavy rainfall. Today, it is Winona's most manicured park area. Not only is it a lovely spot to stroll and enjoy our lake surroundings, but it is Winona's most meaningful park. It is a reverent place, a place that evokes memories and thoughts of our loved ones, our neighbors, and our friends who have fought and died for our freedom. The Veterans Memorial Park became a reality in 1995 after numerous veterans pulled their desires together to create a place where their comrades could be honored. On November 11th of 2001, 2 months after the tragedy of September 11th, the park was rededicated to remind us that we live in dangerous times and to honor those who have served our country by defending our freedom and show support for those who will go in harm's way on our behalf in the future.
Talking about this brief ceremony, something came up to us. Why don't we rededicate the park? Especially, well, the real reason we wanted to rededicate the park is because of what's going on in the world today. It's kind of like renewing one's vows. When we started this park, there was a reason for it, and what's going on today definitely drives that point home.
Today we will find out how the park came about and learn about the symbolism throughout the park. We will also speak with a war historian who will give us a brief history of the wars represented here. I'm sitting here with Ed Koner, who is the past chairman and now a board member of the Veterans Park Memorial Park Association, correct?
Absolutely, right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, welcome again to the Spirit of Winona, Ed.
Well, I can say this to you, welcome on behalf of the Veterans Memorial Park Association, HBC, and the Spirit of Winona. Where anytime we get the opportunity to show this park off, we love to do it, so thank you for coming.
Oh, thanks for having us. Your park is absolutely beautiful. But can you go back to the history and tell me when it began and why it began?
Well, you referred to it earlier in your comments about being a low-level, muddy area, and I can remember years ago, like in the late 50s when they would come down here, and it was used at that time strictly for putting out the white crosses and so on, and they'd come out with hip boots on. Not only was it raining and wet, but the water level was way up. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so over the years, they kept doing that, and then all of a sudden there was a great interest in creating a more of an elaborate park, and Bob Welch, all credit due to Bob Welch, I think, as the veterans approached him and with the concept, and he just kind of took the ball and went with it, and probably wouldn't be here today if it wouldn't have been for Bob Welch.
Winona boy Bob Welch worked for the park department in our city and always had the beautification of Winona on his mind. In designing Veterans Park, he came up with the old stone steps that were taken from the levee in the 1960s and had them placed on either side of the entrance to the park.
Anyway, in 1995, they started building the park up. The city took on the responsibility for that and spent many, many thousands of dollars building this park up and maintaining it ever since. And of course, our mission, upon that being done, our mission was to now create monuments for the park. And there's always, when there's a monument created, there's always somebody designated by virtue of the Veterans Memorial Park Committee. They select a subcommittee that will design and work with these, in our case, the Sunburst Memorial people, and build a monument. And they said, well, what would be the first monument we'd put in there? Well, because we were losing World War II people so fast, we thought that would be the one where people could appreciate it. The veterans themselves could see what we did, and they would have an opportunity to place bricks for themselves and their families to do that, and so on. So that's why it started there.
The World War II monument represents a global war that Winonans were involved in from 1941 to 1945. Approximately 2,400 men and women from Winona served in the war, and 140 of them gave up their lives during this conflict. The war actually began in 1939 when Germany, Japan, and Italy formed an Axis coalition to take over the world. America became involved when Japan tried to take over the Pacific with the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944 was a crucial day in the war because it split the German military between the East, where it was fighting off the Russians, and the West, where the Germans had to deal with the largest amphibian operation in war history when our American soldiers landed to drive back Hitler's armies. Our monument depicts both of these important conflicts. Currently standing with Ted Shoei, who is a war historian, and not only is he a historian, but he was also a chaplain in World War II and the Korean War. Ted, that makes you a very special person, and I understand that you know quite a bit about each war because you are a historian. Well, tell me about World War II.
It freed all of Europe and England, of course, from the dictator's expression over in that part of the world.
Sure.
And we have to think about the Japanese, who were Axis partners with Germany, and all of those islands in the Pacific which they had conquered, and even through China and down to India. And this war then later on, after the invasions of Normandy and the beaches there in France, we then turned to the Pacific, and then you will know how that all came out with the atomic bomb finally using to save many lives of our soldiers from conquering one island after another and finally going into the island, really the big island of Japan. So in that sense it freed us in many different ways.
Now tell me, where were you stationed during World War II, and what was your purpose in the war?
Well, in World War II, I was in the seminary and told to stay there until afterwards, and that would be more useful. And so when I was called to duty, I ended up in occupation in Würzburg, Germany. And there I saw how the efforts of the Americans to bring back the economy of that land took place. And before 1955, we gave up our occupation of Germany, and what a new day it was for them, and a relief for us. World War II was a long war in which we had millions of our people that were involved with this war. And this war cost us 500,000 of our sons and some daughters of our nation. The bricks of those who lost their lives are all around the base of this monument.
Now there's a lot of symbolism here, the monuments themselves and the bricks. The bricks really bring it home to the individual. Tell me about the bricks and how they work.
Well, it's easy enough to get a brick if you qualify. We have, there's two sections in this park. This upper section, of course, is all veterans. Veterans that want bricks, families of veterans that are installing bricks, those that can't do it themselves, those that are gone already, and so on. But we have the bricks. You put a brick in here, a 3-liner brick with 13 characters on each line. Include the things you like to have on it. Then we got the double bricks, $200, 5 lines of 13 characters. And then place them in the areas that you can take credit for. I happen to be here in Korea, as a lot of the people I know. So the lower section over here, if you want to recognize family, recognize celebrations, congratulations, whatever, honoring veterans kind of thing, down on the other side of the park at the lower level. But up here, if you're a veteran, you qualify. And you know what's interesting? That people think you got to live, maybe some of them think you got to live within the city limits of Winona to be on this, because it's Winona's Veterans Park. It's so far from the truth. We have veterans in this park from coast to coast.
And tell me a little bit about the indexing system that you have underneath the gazebo.
All credits to Charlie Smith, who purchased the indexing base council, and we were having problems. We put bricks in here, put 100 bricks in. It's not uncommon to put 100 bricks in here, and on the occasion, and 30 will go in here, and 20 will go over there, and 10 will go over here. But then people come down and say, I can't find my brick. And we'd come down and have to help them hunt for it and look for it. So we decided we've got to cut short. We've got to cut this short and help them a little bit. So in the indexing here, we've got the sidewalk is, if they come down, look, you'll see E, A, B, C, D, E, and if they look in E, section E, and there's a row, there's row so on and so forth in here, it will tell them just where to go to find the brick.
And if someone wanted to order a brick today, who would they call?
I think that if they call me, I could give this number out, and I'm always available, but it would call 452-7975. That would get you to Ed Koner. If you wanted a brick, you could also call the American Legion, 454-4281.
I understand that you put a very symbolic monument in just last weekend. Let's go to that and let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, good.
Now, Ed, I know the park is full of symbolism, and one particular symbol that you step over as soon as you come into the park is here at our feet. Tell me about this special plaque.
Well, when we install the monuments, KIMA, we kind of put the black monument, which showed kind of a joining of these two because many of the MIAs were eventually listed as KIAs. In planning, we for years have talked about doing something with our answer to the unknown soldier, as there are monuments all over the world for unknown soldiers. Instead of building a large monument to that this would be an ideal place to put that in. Joining these two, we would refer to it as veterans instead of a soldier, in memory of all veterans known only but to God. So we thought we think this is very, very beautiful. Whoever did it for us did a great job in printing and graphics. But anyway, that's what that's about.
And I love the way you put it right here in the beginning of the park, too, because it makes you think of the importance of the unknown soldier before you enter the park.
Sure, it's kind of our entryway right here. The two monuments are kind of our entryway to the park.
Now, I also noticed some symbolism on the back of this granite piece here. Tell me about this.
Okay, you've got a double symbol on here. This is pretty much self-explanatory. The dove of peace. Peace as we wish it always was. Peace to the people that are involved in the particular monument. Then we have the gold star on the monument. Only those, I guess, that know their history well know that the gold star stands for Gold Star Mothers. Mothers that have lost sons and daughters in the wars. Years ago, it was not uncommon on the occasion to see this gold star, hanging in the windows of mothers and families who have lost their sons and daughters in the service. So,
the Korean monument was the second monument to be presented in Veterans Park. It represents the war that Ed Koner took part in, as well as many others that live in Winona today. 17 of our hometown men perished in this war. Okay, Ted, now we're at the Korean Memorial. Tell me what this war meant.
Korea was a big surprise to everybody. We had occupied a little bit of Korea after the World War II, and we didn't have too many of our troops over there. And then all of a sudden, the communists from China and Russia started to enter into Korea. And so that caught us in a big bind, and it took a number of years to get our stuff together. And then finally, we freed Korea from that invasion. Korea was called the Forgotten War because everybody tended to forget it. It wasn't important, but it really was important to free that part of the world there. And it's significant to this day that Korea is a free republic and a big trader with us in other parts of the world. So Korea cost us dearly, but it was important that we do that to stay in the Far East.
Ted, what was your role in the Korean War?
My role was to be a chaplain, and I was assigned there, and instead the troops were moved to go to France to stop a communist takeover in northern Germany. And so I never got there at first, but then at the end of my career I became the senior chaplain in Korea after 20-some years. So it's interesting the intrigues and the paths that happened to our various officers and airmen who were assigned one place and never get there, and then their twisted lives bring them back later on to that very point.
Okay. Now, Ted, this was your war. Tell me what this park means to you in coming to this park to bring back memories of the war.
Well, the park, it's really by veterans and it's for veterans. And all of these bricks around here, some are yet living, but many commemorate the dead. And when you add them all up, this part here with another 30-some thousand makes a big sacrifice that we made in the world, and that total sacrifice runs to about 1,500,000 of people who made the supreme sacrifice of offering their lives, plus many disabled people who are still with us. If you go to Minneapolis today to the VA, you'll see the results of this war too. It was a tough one with a lot of cold and winter and snow.
The World War I monument depicts the Great War, which began in 1914 between England, France, and Russia against Germany and Austro-Hungary. The United States became involved in 1917 until the war ended on November 11, 1918. The soldiers were so battle-weary at the end of this war that there was no celebration, only a stunned disbelief that they could finally go home. The Great War was radically different from other wars because of the introduction of poison gas. 1,750 men and women from Winona County served in this war, and 55 perished. Flanders Field was a site in Belgium that provided the most concentrated and bloodiest fighting in World War I. An area that once held farmland became a sea of mud and graves of dead men. John McRae, a Canadian soldier, wrote a famous poem as he looked down the depressing sight of grave after grave in which he could see poppies growing between the crosses. To him, they signified hope, life, and reassurance. The veterans have since made the poppy their symbol of hope and use it to raise money to help ex-servicemen. Each one of these monuments is just a fabulous representation of the war. I mean, the design of this big globe on top of this India stone is beautiful. But tell me what World War I now meant to our country. What did that do for us?
What did it do for us? It kind of freed the world for trade again between our country and other parts of the world. Basically, there was a German emphasis on trade and taking over the trade from Britain. And so the war initially, took place first on the continent there, and they were headed, of course, to England. But they never made that, and they got stalled in France. Versailles was an enormous battle where there are crosses all over the hillside. And that started in 1913, and it wasn't until 1918 that we finally went in to give an assist in France to stop the invasion of the Germans that were headed for the Atlantic coast. What does it mean? Well, it meant to put down again a dictator-type ship that was emphasizing its way around in this world, trying to do its thing and enslave people as it went along. So it, in a way, freed us, but it didn't do it enough when we didn't join the League of Nations that time, so we had to enter finally into World War II. Victims of World War I were mostly from the mustard gas that were used, and till just recently you could still find some of these people in our Veterans Hospital hardly making themselves able to breathe because of the lung disturbance from that mustard gas.
What war did they start bringing the soldiers back to bury them, the soldiers that died on the battlefield? What war did they start bringing them back home to make sure they were buried here on their home ground? Well,
I think World War I especially did that, yeah, and of course World War II. Many families decided to leave them buried there. One has 9,000 people that are buried there, that the people in this country, their parents decided to leave them there on that spot. And of course they go and visit them.
That's really the significance of these parks, isn't it? The fact that we can remember those people here on our homeland.
That's right. You really hit the point. And this is for our children that are to come to show them what freedom costs. It really costs. There's great sacrifices made by our men and women in this country that we might enjoy freedom. And we need to teach our kids that. And we need to teach them also that they can guard these precepts of freedom, and if they are necessary, not only preserve but protect them, and then above all share them. When we talk at the Civil War Monument, I'd like to say something about that.
Okay, well, let's go there.
Good.
All right. The Civil War Monument represents the war between the states. The southern states included 11 states that formed the Confederacy and used slave labor to produce their crops. The northern states were in an industrial society in which slavery was illegal. Despite their different points of view, compromises kept the union of the two together for many years. With the election of Abraham Lincoln, however, in 1860, the situation became explosive, and as the country expanded west, the southern states became more threatened and wanted to control the government of the expanding union with their point of view. War broke out on April 12, 1861. The conflict lasted for 4 years when the last Confederate army surrendered. Over 600,000 lives were lost in battle and from various diseases. $5 billion in property was destroyed, and 4 million black slaves were freed. This was the only war fought on American soil by Americans. At home in Winona, this was the first war our forefathers took part in. 856 served and 92 died. Ted, we're at the Civil War Monument, and I know you have something special to tell us about this war. What is that?
I want to tell you about this lady behind us here, the Weeping Mother. It was a war between brothers. It was a war among ourselves, and that's the sad part of it. When we talk about numbers before, we lost 500,000 in the Civil War here at home in our own land. And it was a war, a lot of people think, to free the slaves, but that is not true. The war was to save the Union. South Carolina decided it could secede, and Abraham Lincoln said, you can't do that. And then other states in the South said, oh yes, we can. And so next thing, we had a tier of northern states and southern states at war. It was a long, hard war. And at Gettysburg, after that hard battle, then Lincoln said so many good things about this country conceived in liberty and dedicated this proposition that all men are created equal and so on. And then he hearkened back as he was inaugurated against that we have freedom here and we need to share it with all of us, with one another. And of course that brought your Emancipation Proclamation and the freedom of the slaves. But he added them too, we need to share this freedom with other peoples in the world that don't have it. And if we don't share that freedom, we're going to lose it. And we become slaves again ourselves.
Beyond the Civil War Memorial lies the Vietnam War Memorial, which represents a war that most of us remember too well. I remember a moment in time, looking around at my classmates in high school, wondering which of us would be going off to fight in this conflict so far away from Winona for a cause I didn't understand. This war was fought for nearly 20 years, and the purpose was to keep the communist government in the north of Vietnam from taking over the south of Vietnam and consequently spreading throughout Southeast Asia and beyond. Ultimately, the United States failed in their goal, and in 1975, Vietnam was reunified under communist control. More than 58,000 Americans lost their lives. 7 Winonans died in Vietnam. Today, there are 4,000 Vietnam veterans living in Winona County. The casualties would have been much more extreme, except for the intense use of the helicopter in carrying the wounded away to safety. Now, Ted, as we started walking over to the Vietnam Memorial, you mentioned that this was really a rough war. Tell me what makes it such a rough war.
Oh, it was a really rough war because the purpose didn't seem to be clear, what we were there for. And usually in our wars, we let the generals do the deciding and how many troops we needed and what they needed to do to get the war over with. This war was mainly run from Washington, from the White House, and with the Secretary of Defense there and the President instead of down on the field. And so many of our troops had to suffer because of that. Another thing was that they weren't to shoot until they were shot at. And this kind of complicated the whole operation of a war, because in a war you go after the guy that's coming after you. And if you have to go back over there behind the lines to get him, you do that. And then there were a lot of truths that weren't told at the time, of how many were dead and how soon we were going to come home. This all got garbled up there with the news media. And so consequently, many of our guys come home and weren't even honored in their civilian communities. It became so bitter. But thank God, after all of these years now, people in Vietnam are leaning toward America and our way of life and our values. They saw something from our guys, and our troops were there. And now they're wanting to lean our way, and they're coming our way, and we'll initiate trade with them, and it'll make a better and beautiful day for the world when that happens.
On Independence Day this year, on July 4th, the 6th monument representing specific wars was presented to the community. This memorial depicts 5 early American wars that shaped our government. The French and Indian War in 1754 decided we would have an English-speaking civilization on this continent. The War of 1812 freed the sea for our Navy and kept control of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. The Mexican War of 1846 opened the door for California and the Southwest. The Spanish-American War of 1898 involved our country with Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and Hawaii. The most memorable war depicted on this monument is the American Revolutionary War, which really established us as a nation and gave us liberty.
These are the things that we must teach our children. These monuments, we must teach them. It's a great show of the cost of liberty that these veterans have given us, this nation. This is the price of liberty, and we must teach our children this. And as we live with this liberty ourselves and we protect it and we defend it, we will find that our children will follow along.
Well, we decided to end our visit today at Memorial Park here at the American Revolutionary War Memorial, which really is probably the most significant memorial here because this war depicts the beginning of our freedom here in the United States. Correct?
Correct, Joyce.
Okay.
Yes.
And what is significant here on the face of this
the many
memorial?
faces here are just a composite of our American society really to this day, from the Scottish Minutemen to the German and the French, the Indians and the blacks that all participated. And that's our society today, and we're all diverse, but we're all indivisible in this nation called the United States of America, or the Republic of the United States of America.
Okay. And Ted, I have another question for you. I know that you've traveled to many, many memorial parks throughout the nation. Tell me how this one compares to those.
This is a gem. It really is, in the setting with the lake and the sugarloaf and the green glory all about us. Where could you find a better thing? And that nice park over there includes that band shell, a lot of nice benches for people. You can come here almost day and night and you'll find somebody in the park meditating, standing on a brick, thinking, or just sitting by themselves. Wonderful.
Well, it is beautiful. And Ed, I want to thank you because I know you're one of the people that are responsible for establishing this park here at our Lake Winona. And I also want to thank you, Ted, for all the information you gave us today on the history of all the wars. And I want to thank the two of you especially for your participation in the wars for our freedom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Great. And thank you for joining us today. Please join me again next week. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of Winona.